After the not-so-great reception of the current generation, as well as the announcement that this is going to be the last Golf with internal combustion engines, many expected to see the German carmaker fixing its most iconic nameplate to the point where everyone can say, this is a proper farewell. The facelifted model, the Golf 8.5, finally had a premiere, and we can clearly see that Volkswagen has addressed some of the most problematic aspects. Is this enough to fight the fast-growing crossover segment? Let's find out. If you're a fan of the Volkswagen Golf, you know that even-numbered generations don't bring radical changes. Therefore, no one was surprised after the premiere of the 8th generation. It brought pretty mild changes over the Mark 7 with a slightly modified face. The overall shape and dimensions remained identical to the predecessor, but somehow the reception wasn't great. That's why VW designers put a lot of effort into this mid-cycle refresh, reportedly. But the overall layout is still there, so you'll have to take a pretty close look to notice changes. Of course, most of them are at the front, where you can notice redesigned LED lighting, while higher trim levels also bring an illuminated badge for the first time in a Golf. We're still not sure whether we like these details or not, but we definitely like the new, more advanced matrix LED setup that's available in the more expensive variants with high beams that are 2 times more powerful than before. Another part that requires a closer look to notice changes is the front bumper, with very subtle reshaping that makes this hatch slightly more elegant than before. The rear end also gets a couple of updates, mainly in terms of new taillights, which now feature new 3D graphics with 3 patterns. Audi owners know very well what we're talking about. As for the overall shape and proportions, things remain the same of course, with 2 familiar body styles on offer. Besides the iconic hatchback layout, the Golf Mark 8 also comes as a station wagon, though only in Europe. Worth mentioning are new color options: Crystal Ice Blue, Anemone Blue, Oyster Silver, Grenadilla Black, as well as 5 new alloy wheel designs ranging from 16 to 19 inches. The thing with Golf is that it has never been the most engaging hatchback to drive, but it's good enough to satisfy most of the drivers. The same is true with comfort. It's nowhere near the most comfortable models in the class, but it's good enough for most of the drivers. Golf has always been about that balance, being good enough in all aspects but not standing out in any. That's the secret of its huge success, and the facelifted version, of course, continues in the same way. Under the skin, things are pretty much the same, with the setup that hasn't changed much since the launch of the 7th generation, based on VW's well-known MQB architecture. Still, it's worth mentioning that the ride quality depends a bit on the version you choose. Namely, the rear suspension setup can be quite different. The cheaper versions come with a torsion beam, while the more expensive variants provide a slightly higher level of comfort thanks to the independent rear setup. The officials haven't said anything about the changes in this aspect, so we presume things are going to remain the same. For most Golf fans, the 8th generation represents a disappointment, even a downgrade when it comes to interior design. Disappointing materials and build quality were the first complaints, and were followed by complaints in terms of ergonomics, especially when it comes to those hypersensitive steering wheel mounted buttons. The updated model brings back conventional buttons, so VW officials are now expecting much better feedback. Unfortunately, the company hasn't made similar changes on the center stack, so the climate controls carry on with the not-so-ideal dreaded sliders, though they are at least illuminated now. But the biggest star of this facelift, at least when it comes to the interior design, is the new infotainment system. The first thing you'll notice is that the screens are bigger now. Base versions now feature a 10.4-inch unit, while higher trim levels bring a more impressive 12.9-inch touchscreen. The screens have been modified to improve ergonomics with the aforementioned sliders, but what's way more important is that the software is completely new, with upgrades in graphics, response, and overall functionality. Voice controls have been upgraded too, with better control of air conditioning, navigation, etc. Finally, there's a new head-up display available in higher trim levels. As for the rest of the cabin design, the overall layout remains the same, with solid build quality and a familiar amount of passenger space. As mentioned, this hatchback is good but doesn't stand out in any aspect, so the same thing refers to the passenger and cargo space, which are about average for the segment. As for the powertrain, the legendary hatchback will continue with a broad range of options, even though some of the engines seem to be dropped from the offer. For example, in the recent presentation, there was no word about the small 1.0-liter 3-cylinder engine, so we may presume it won't be offered anymore. If that's the case, the offer will start with the familiar 1.5-liter TSI, but only in Europe. In North America, the German carmaker will continue to offer only hot hatch iterations, GTI and R models, but we'll talk about them in a moment. Back to the 1.5-liter Turbo 4, there are two output variants with 115 and 150 horsepower, paired to a 6-speed manual gearbox. The same engine is also available in a mild hybrid version called ETSI, but despite the small electric motor, it still features a combined output of 150 horsepower. The key difference is actually in the transmission, as the mildly electrified Golf comes exclusively with a 7-speed dual-clutch gearbox. Those who look for something peppier but don't necessarily need the upgraded GTI and R can get a 2-liter unit with 201 horsepower and dual-clutch gearbox. Then there's a plug-in hybrid called the e-hybrid with a new 1.5-liter Turbo 4, 201 horsepower, and a 6-speed dual-clutch gearbox. This is actually one of the models that gets upgraded, considering that a 10.6 kilowatt-hour battery has left room for a bigger 19.7 kilowatt-hour unit, so the max range in the EV mode goes from 50 to 62 miles, or 80 to 100 kilometers if you prefer metrics. The new battery also supports much faster charging, up to 50 kilowatts, which means that you should be able to charge 80% of it in about 25 minutes. With a full tank and a fully charged battery, the upgraded hybrid should be able to make over 620 miles or 1,000 kilometers before refueling and charging. Just like the base hybrid, the performance-oriented GTE also replaces the infamous 1.4 with a 1.5-liter Turbo 4 with variable turbocharger geometry and gains 27 horsepower, so the max output is now rated at 268 horsepower. Volkswagen's legendary TDI diesel engines are counting their last days, but they will continue in the facelifted 8th generation. Of course, we're talking about the well-known 2.0-liter Turbo 4, available with 115 and 150 horsepower, with the former featuring a 6-speed manual and the latter being mated to a dual-clutch gearbox. On the other hand, the performance-oriented GTD most likely won't return. Finally, the two hottest versions, GTI and R, will remain the only ones exported to North America. The former has already been presented, and it brings a nice 20 horsepower increase, though some of the enthusiasts won't be happy to hear that the manual is no longer on offer, but only the dual-clutch transmission. The same goes for the GTI Club Sport, which puts out 296 horsepower and should arrive later this year. The Golf R is also coming later this year, most likely in the summer. So far, we haven't heard anything about a power increase or any other modification, though we presume the new 2024 Golf R might get a few horses more. The current version puts out 320 horsepower and is able to hit 60 in a little bit over 4 seconds. Also, some rumors suggest that the wagon version of Golf R could come to North America. So far, this variant has been reserved for European and Australian markets. Despite the presentation, the refreshed 2024 Volkswagen Golf won't hit the market so soon. It's expected to hit most of the markets by the summer, possibly with a minor price increase. For reference, the UK version currently starts at around £27,000. On the other side of the Atlantic, the cheapest Golf you can currently get is the GTI, with a starting price of around $33,000. What do you think of the refreshed 2024 Volkswagen Golf? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.